Hey guys, today I'm doing a power jack repair on an Asus S712J laptop, and this has a loose connection where you plug in the power cord. You can kind of wiggle it in just the right way to make it power on and charge the battery, and it goes back and forth from AC to battery power. So you need to take it apart, replace the power jack. And the first step here is to remove the bottom cover, and there's a bunch of screws holding that in place. And once I have all the screws out of there, I take a thin guitar pick and just run it along the edges of the bottom cover just to get those connections to pry up. You kind of want to go around it and just try to find a spot there and pry up a little bit. And once you have a gap, you can use your other hand to kind of take it there and apply some pressure upwards. Some of these are pretty tricky. This is kind of a tricky one. There we go. Now I finally got a little bit of space in between there. Take my other hand, apply some pressure, and just be careful when you're removing these. You don't want to rip the clips off that hold those down. Alright, so now we have access to the motherboard and battery, etc. I'm going to remove the hard drive here. It's just a little cable that you flip up, flip down for lock and unlock. So you flip it up to unlock it, and you can detach the cable from it. And the battery is what I'm disconnecting next. There's a little fastener that kind of goes over that connection, and so you push it back like I was doing with my flathead there. And then once you've done that, you can just pry up the battery cable. Next thing here, I'm detaching the speaker. And then I'm going to detach the touchpad and backlight cable and keyboard. And here I'm going to remove the wireless card. And here I'm detaching the video cable. And here I'm removing some screws from the hinge. The hinge goes over the motherboard, kind of where the jack area is, so we want to remove those screws, and you can lift up a little bit on the laptop, and that'll make the hinge come up just a little bit. I forgot a screw there. And once you do that, it'll kind of give you a little bit of space to get your thumb under there, and you can remove that or push up that hinge so it's not covering the motherboard. And here I'm going to take some of the motherboard screws off. There's still something that's holding it in there. So here I'm going to detach these or remove these heatsink screws. It turns out I think it's just a little piece of tape that's over one of the parts of the motherboard here. And so now I'm going to take out the hard drive, SSD. No, that's not it either. Sometimes you're just checking for screws that you can't see because they'll be covered by a piece of tape or something. And here I'm just removing some battery screws. Now I got the battery removed. And here I'm detaching the I/O cable. There we go. That's what's holding it down there. Alright, now we have access to the power jack. So now it's time to desolder this thing and get a new one installed. And the first step here is going to add some flux to each one of these through holes. This helps break up the solder. That really aids in the desoldering process. As you can see, I'm putting a decent amount on there. I'm going to get all those solder through holes heated up really well. And then the next step is I like to add some solder that just helps break up the old existing solder that's already there. Alright, now I'm going to take my desoldering braid and just try to suck the solder out of each one of those through holes. Sometimes this is easier said than done. It can be difficult to get all of it out, and that's why I use the hot air station as well in my repairs, to just get the jack removed at the end when I've removed as much solder as possible, and get the hot air station out to finish the job. And I'm using a Hakko FX888D soldering iron with a chisel tip, and I'm running it at about 750 degrees roughly. And if this is the kind of repair that you're not comfortable with doing, we offer this for $69 parts and labor at PCRepairHelp.net. So now I'm taking some 99% alcohol, I'm just cleaning all the excess flux off of the board. And here I'm just putting some thermal tape over the port next to it. I don't want to get any heat soldering from the air soldering station on the sensitive components that are around the jack. This one isn't too bad, it doesn't have too much there, but it's always good just to put that thermal tape over it if you're going to do any kind of hot air soldering, just to protect whatever surrounding components are there. And so now I usually run the hot air temperature around 400 degrees roughly, and I try to keep it about a half an inch away from the jack. And here I've already removed as much solder as I can get out with the braid and the iron, and now I'm just going to do the rest of it here with the hot air. So I'm holding it with the tweezers in the other hand, so because this thing kind of just falls out, and once that solder gets flowing, which you'll see here shortly, this thing is just kind of fall out, and you can take the tweezers and just grab it. And I'm taking those tweezers there, kind of checking how loose it is, and you get an idea once you do it a few times, but you'll see that solder start flowing. You'll wiggle it around with the tweezers, and you'll see the through hole kind of moving, that pin's moving around inside there. You can see that solder flowing, the jack's moving a little bit, and there you go. Now it's out, and we need to finish the desoldering job with the braid again and the iron, just removing that thermal tape. I don't want to melt it onto the board by accident or something. And so just like before, I'm going to add some more flux and get back at it with the braid. So once again too, I like to add solder. I know it sounds counterintuitive to add solder to something you're trying to remove, but that really helps get the flow of that old existing solder in there kind of float up, and makes it go into the braid much easier along with the flux. And here I'm just taking the tweezers, I'm just pushing some of that solder through. Some of the solder is just extremely pesky on these things. It does not want to come out into the braid. And so doing a little bit of pushing on it on one side and then trying to desolder it when I flip over the board from the other is kind of a technique I use sometimes. You want to be extremely careful when you're trying to push something through a through hole like that. You don't want to damage the through hole. So once again, just more solder, push it through a little bit and try to just desolder it from the other side. And here I'm just using the same technique again. Just really careful with that. Alright, now I'm going to install the new jack in there. And I'm putting some cutters underneath that jack just to make it nice and level. And I'm going to add some more flux. The point of the handle under there is just to keep that jack nice and flush with the board so it's not at an angle dipping down when you're trying to do the soldering. So I'm just going to add some solder to each one of the through holes here, just get it flowing through nicely. And here I'm just going over it again with the iron just to make sure that solder is flowing through on each side. And everything looks great. So now I'm going to take some of my 99% alcohol, clean all the flux off, make it nice and shiny. And this is the finished product. The jack has been replaced and it's ready to go back in the laptop here, if I can get the camera to focus. There we go. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comment section below. Thank you.